Hey everyone! Tonight we're stepping into the shadows of history's darkest corners. Have you ever wondered why medieval torture devices still haunt our nightmares? I'm standing in a cold, damp dungeon, the kind of place where the air feels heavy with secrets. The flickering torchlight barely cuts through the gloom, and somewhere in the distance, I swear, I hear the clank of chains. This is where the medieval world's most infamous tools of pain were born, not just to punish but to terrify. We're diving into the gruesome truth behind torture devices, separating myth from reality. And trust me, the reality is wilder than any horror movie. From the Rack to the Iron Maiden, these weren't just machines. They were symbols of power, fear, and the justice system that makes our skin crawl today. So, grab a seat, maybe not too close to the fire, and let's unravel why these devices grip the medieval mind and still fascinate us now. Picture yourself in Europe, around the 13th century. Knights are clashing in tournaments, castles loom over misty valleys, and the church's word is law. But beneath the pageantry, there's a brutal underbelly. Crime, heresy, or even a whispered rumor could land you in a dungeon like this one. Torture wasn't just about punishment. It was a spectacle, a warning to anyone who dared step out of line. The devices we'll explore weren't random. They were crafted with a sick kind of precision, designed to break bodies and spirits. Why did people back then think this was okay? That's what we're here to figure out, and it starts with understanding the world they lived in. Let's set the scene. Medieval society was rigid nobles at the top, peasants scraping by, and the church watching every move. Sin was a public matter, and justice was harsh. If you stole a loaf of bread, you might lose a hand. If you questioned the church, well, things got a lot worse. Torture devices became tools of control, especially during times of crisis. Think of the Inquisition, when fear of heresy swept through Europe like wildfire. Accused witches, rebellious peasants, or even unlucky travelers could find themselves facing the unimaginable. These devices weren't hidden away. They were often used in public squares, where crowds gathered to watch. Can you imagine the chill running through you as you saw someone strapped to a device, knowing it could be you next? But here's the kicker. Not everything we've heard about medieval torture is true. Some stories, like the Iron Maiden, might be exaggerated, cooked up by later generations to paint the Middle Ages as barbaric. Others, like the Rack, were all too real, stretching victims to their breaking point. As we go through this journey, I'll show you which devices were as bad as the legends say and which ones might surprise you. Were the people who used these tools monsters, or were they just products of their time? That's a question I want you to keep in the back of your mind. Let's talk about why torture gripped the medieval imagination. It wasn't just about pain, it was about power. Kings, lords, and bishops used it to keep order in a world that felt like it was always on the edge of chaos. Wars, plagues, and uprisings were constant threats. The Black Death wiped out half of Europe, leaving survivors paranoid and desperate for control. Torture became a way to root out enemies, real or imagined, and the church. They saw it as a path to salvation. Confess your sins, even under duress, and maybe you'd save your soul. Twisted, right? Now, imagine being accused of a crime you didn't commit. You're dragged to a dungeon, your wrists bound, and you hear the creak of a wooden device in the corner. Your heart's pounding what's coming next. That fear, that helplessness, was exactly what these tools were designed to create. The Rack, the pair of anguish. The breaking wheel, they weren't just about physical pain. They were psychological weapons. The moment you saw them, You knew resistance was futile. Or was it some people, against all odds, defied their tormentors? We'll meet them later, but for now, let's step closer to the first device on our list. Before we dive into the Rex horrors, let's pause. Why do we, in 2025, still talk about these devices? Maybe it's because they remind us how far we've come or how close we are to slipping back. Medieval knights and their code of honor seem noble, but this dark side shows what happened when power went unchecked. As we move forward, I want you to think, could you have survived a medieval dungeon? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this story going. The wreck is waiting, and it's not patient. The dungeon's chill seeps into my bones as I step toward a hulking wooden frame in the corner, its ropes and rollers gleaming with menace under the torchlight. This is the wreck, the medieval world's most infamous torture device. And just looking at it makes my stomach twist. Imagine being strapped to this thing, your wrists and ankles bound to those creaking rollers, knowing what's coming. The wreck wasn't just a tool, it was a nightmare made real, designed to stretch a person's body until they broke physically and mentally. I can almost hear the groans of the wood and the screams that echoed in places like this. Let's dive into why the wreck became the go-to for interrogators and what it really did to those who faced it. Picture yourself in a stone-walled chamber, maybe in London or Paris, around the 14th century. You're accused of treason, heresy, or maybe just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The local lord or bishop wants answers, and they're not asking nicely. The rack was their favorite way to get confessions, especially during the Inquisition, when rooting out heretics was an obsession. Why? Because it was simple but devastatingly effective. 2 ropes, a wooden frame, and a couple of turns of the roller could make anyone talk, or so they thought. But here's the thing, the wreck wasn't just about pain, it was about fear. The moment you saw it, your mind started bargaining. Let's break down how it worked. You're laid flat on the rack, arms tied to one end, legs to the other. The executioner, usually some grim-faced guy who's done this 100 times, starts turning the rollers. At first, it's just a tug, a warning. Your muscles tense, your joints ache. Then he keeps going. The ropes pull tighter, and your body stretches inch by agonizing inch. Your ligaments pop, your joints dislocate, and if they don't stop, your bones snap. Some victims were stretched so far their spines gave way. Can you imagine the sound of that? The worst part. They'd often pause, letting you hang there in agony, begging you to confess. And plenty did, whether they were guilty or not. But here's where it gets wild. The wreck was as much about show as it was about pain. In some places, like England, they drag it into public squares. Crowds would gather, whispering as the victim screamed. It was a massive step out of line, and this is what you get. During the Peasants' Revolt in 1381, rebels were racked to send a signal to anyone else thinking of defying the king. The device wasn't just breaking bodies, it was breaking resistance. Ever wonder what you do in that moment? Confess to save yourself or hold out and risk it all? Now, let's talk about who faced the rack. It wasn't just criminals. Knights caught on the wrong side of a war, priests accused of heresy, even women labeled as witches. They all ended up here. Take Guy Fawkes, though he's a bit later in the 1600s. He was wrecked for his part in the gunpowder plot, and the records say he barely spoke until they pushed him to the brink. The wreck didn't care about your status. It was an equalizer in the worst way. And the church, they justify it, saying a confession cleansed your soul. Twisted logic. Right. The physical toll was horrific, but the psychological damage was worse. Victims knew the pain could stop if they talked, but what if they had nothing to say? Some held out, driven by faith or sheer stubbornness, but most cracked. The rack's design played on that human instinct to survive. And here's a dark truth: sometimes the torturers didn't even want answers. They just wanted to make an example. During the Albigensian Crusade, entire villages were terrorized, with the rack as the star of the show. It wasn't about justice, it was about control. Let's step back for a second. Why was the rack so popular? It was cheap, portable, and didn't require a skilled operator. Any dungeon could have one, and every turn of the roller was a power trip for the person in charge. But it wasn't foolproof. Some victims died too quickly, others passed out, and then there were those rare souls who refused to break. We'll meet them later, but for now, picture the rack's legacy, a symbol of medieval cruelty that still chills us today. As I stand here, staring at those ropes, I can't help but wonder what made people think this was okay. Was it fear of chaos, blind faith, or just human nature at its worst? The rack story isn't just about pain, it's about a world where power ruled everything. Next time, we'll step up to something even creepier: the Iron Maiden. Ever heard it was a myth? Well, let's find out. What do you think? Could you face the rack and keep your secrets? Drop a comment and let me know. The dungeon's shadows seem to deepen as I move past the rack, my boots echoing on the stone floor, until I stop before a towering, coffin-like shape that sends a shiver down my spine. This is the Iron Maiden, its iron surface etched with faint scratches, as if pleading voices left their mark. They say it's the ultimate symbol of medieval cruelty, a spiked chamber that closed around its victim, piercing them in a deadly embrace. But here's the twist: was the Iron Maiden even real in the Middle Ages? Or is it a myth that's been haunting us for centuries? I'm standing here, staring at its looming presence, and I can't help but feel the weight of its legend. Let's dig into the truth behind this terrifying device and why it's gripped our imaginations. Picture yourself in a grim fortress, maybe in Germany or Spain, around the 15th century. You're accused of something unforgivable: heresy, treason, or witchcraft. The guards drag you to a chamber where this iron monstrosity waits, its hinged doors slightly ajar, revealing rows of jagged spikes inside. The stories say you'd be forced into the Maiden. The doors slowly shut, and those spikes would pierce your body, not always to kill, but to prolong the agony. The image is chilling: a human trapped in a metal tomb, their screams muffled as the world outside moves on. But hold up, did this really happen? Or is the Iron Maiden more fiction than fact? Let's start with what we know. The Iron Maiden's reputation exploded in the 19th century, when historians and showmen started hyping up the Middle Ages as a barbaric era. Museums displayed authentic Iron Maidens, claiming they were medieval torture devices. Crowds flocked to see them, drawn to the horror like moths to a flame. But here's the catch: there's no solid evidence that Iron Maidens were widely used or even existed during the medieval period. Most scholars now think they were either rare prototypes or completely made up later, inspired by earlier devices like spiked cages or execution mantles. So, why does the Iron Maiden feel so real to us? Let's step into the medieval mindset. Torture was about spectacle, and the idea of a spiked coffin fits that perfectly. Imagine the fear it would inspire. Just the sight of it could make someone confess. Some records mention devices called maidens in places like Nuremberg, but they were more like restraining cages than the spiked death traps we picture. During the Spanish Inquisition, interrogators loved tools that played on psychological dread, and a device like this would have been a showstopper, Even if it wasn't common, the concept wasn't far off from real devices like the rack or the breaking wheel. Can you feel the panic of standing before something like this, knowing what might come next? Now, let's talk about why the Iron Maiden's legend grew. By the 1700s, Europe was obsessed with reforming justice, and the Middle Ages became a scapegoat for everything savage. Writers exaggerated medieval torture to make their own era seem enlightened. The Iron Maiden, with its gruesome flair, was perfect for that narrative. It popped up in novels, engravings, and later in horror movies, cementing its place in our collective nightmares. Ever seen one in a museum? Most of those were built in the 1800s, not the 1300s. It's like a medieval urban legend that just won't die. But let's not dismiss it entirely. Even if the Iron Maiden wasn't a medieval staple, similar devices existed. Spiked chairs, crushing presses, and other contraptions were real enough, and they served the same purpose to terrify and punish. The Inquisition used anything that could break a person's will, and the idea of being trapped in a spiked enclosure isn't far-fetched. Imagine being accused of witchcraft, your fate sealed by a zealous priest. You're pushed toward a device that looks like a metal sarcophagus. Whether it's spiked or not, the fear alone could make you spill secrets you didn't have. That's the power of these tools, real or imagined. Let's zoom out. The Iron Maiden story isn't just about one device, it's about how we view the past. We love stories of knights and castles, but we are just as drawn to the dark side dungeons, torture, betrayal. The Maiden feeds that fascination, blending truth with exaggeration. It's like a medieval ghost story, haunting us because it feels like something that could have happened. And maybe, in some forgotten dungeon, it did. What would you do if you faced a device like this? Beg for mercy or stare it down? As I stand here, the Iron Maiden's doors seem to beckon, daring me to step closer. Its spikes may be more myth than reality, but the fear it represents is all too human. Next, we'll face a device that's undeniably real and just as horrifying, the pair of anguish. Ever heard of it? It's worse than you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you buy the Iron Maiden's legend? Or is it all hype? Let's keep this journey going. The dungeon's air grows thicker as I step away from the Iron Maiden, my eyes catching a glint of metal on a rough wooden table nearby a small, pear-shaped device that looks deceptively simple, almost like a piece of fruit carved from iron. This is the Pair of Anguish, and don't let its size fool you. It's one of the most sinister torture tools ever devised. Its name alone sends a chill, hinting at the cruelty it inflicted on those accused of crimes too taboo to speak aloud. I'm holding it now, its cold weight heavy in my hands, and I can't shake the image of the pain it caused. Let's uncover the dark purpose of the Pair of Anguish and why it was reserved for the medieval world's most reviled sinners. Imagine you're in a dimly lit chamber, maybe in 15th century Italy or France, where the church's grip on morality is ironclad. You're accused of something shameful, blasphemy, sodomy, or spreading lies against the crown. The interrogators don't just want a confession, they want to humiliate you, to mark your body as proof of your sin. That's where the Pair of Anguish comes in. This device, small enough to fit in a torturer's hand, was designed to be inserted into a victim's mouth, rectum, or other orifices, depending on the crime. Once inside, the torturer would turn a screw and the pair's metal leaves would slowly expand, tearing flesh and causing unimaginable agony. Can you even picture the dread of seeing this thing brought towards you? Let's get into how it worked. The pair was made of iron or bronze with 4 segments that look like petals. A key or screw at the base controlled those segments. When turned, they spread apart, widening inside the victim's body. If it was used orally, it could shatter teeth and dislocate jaws. Elsewhere, the damage was even more horrific, often leaving permanent injury or death from infection. The device wasn't always meant to kill. Sometimes it was about prolonged suffering, a public lesson in what happened to those who defied the church or state. The worst part, it was personal. The torturer had to look you in the eyes as they turned that screw. Now, picture the scene. You're chained in a dungeon, the air thick with the smell of damp stone and fear. The pear was often used in secret, away from public squares, because it targets heretics, those accused of sexual crimes, or even women labeled as witches were seen as threats to society's moral fabric. During the Inquisition, the Church justified it as a way to cleanse sin. A priest might stand nearby, urging you to confess while the device did its work. Ever wonder what kind of person could operate this thing? Were they cold, or did they believe they were doing God's will? The pear's cruelty wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. Its shape and use were tied to the crime. Blasphemers got it in the mouth, others in more invasive ways. This made it a favorite for punishing crimes that offended medieval sensibilities, like gossip or forbidden love. In some cases, it was used on women accused of witchcraft, their bodies violated as a warning to others. The records are sparse, but trial accounts from places like Toulouse or Seville mention pears in chilling detail. One woman, accused of poisoning her husband in 1480s France, endured it before her execution, her crime supposedly cursing her village. The truth? Probably just bad luck. But here's what makes the pear stand out: its precision. Unlike the rack, which broke everyone the same way, the pear was tailored to the victim's alleged sin. That customization made it feel personal, like the punishment was written in your fate, and it worked. Most victims confessed, if only to stop the pain. But confessions didn't always mean freedom. Many were executed anyway, their bodies marked by the pear's damage. The device was a tool of control, reminding everyone that no sin, no matter how private, was safe from judgment. Let's talk about why this device feels so unsettling today. It's not just the brutality, it's the intimacy of the violence. The pear required the torturer to be close, to see every flinch, every tear. That closeness makes it different from a sword or a noose. And while it wasn't as common as the rack, its reputation grew because of its shock value. By the 1600s, it was a symbol of everything wrong with medieval justice, even as reformers started questioning such methods. Ever think about how far we've come, or haven't? As I set the pear back on the table, its metal glints like a warning. This wasn't just a device, it was a statement about power, shame, and fear. Next, we'll face the breaking wheel, a public spectacle that turned torture into theater. What would you do if you faced the pear's judgment? Could you hold out, drop a comment, and let's keep this grim journey going. The dungeon's oppressive silence breaks as I step out into an imagined open square. The cobblestones slick with rain and the air buzzing with the restless crowd's murmurs. Before me looms the breaking wheel, a massive wooden circle mounted on the platform, its spokes stained dark from years of blood and despair. This wasn't a device hidden in shadows, it was a public spectacle, designed to crush bones and spirits in front of cheering, jeering onlookers. The breaking wheel turned torture into theater, a brutal reminder of what happened to those who defied the medieval order. I can almost hear the creak of the wheel and the gasps of the crowd as the executioner raises his iron bar. Let's dive into the gruesome reality of this device and why it drew people like moths to a flame. Picture yourself in a bustling town square, maybe in 14th century Germany or France, where justice was as much about punishment as it was about performance. You're accused of a serious crime, murder, theft, or rebellion against the Lord. The breaking wheel was reserved for the worst offenders, those whose deaths needed to send a message. You'd be tied to the wheel, sometimes spread-eagled, sometimes curled around its curve. The executioner, wielding a heavy club or iron bar, would smash your limbs, breaking bones with sickening cracks. The goal wasn't a quick death, it was prolonged agony. Your body mangled, but alive, displayed for all to see. Can you imagine the crowd's mix of horror and fascination? Let's break down how it worked. The wheel was sturdy, often raised on a platform so everyone could get a good view. Ropes or chains held you in place, your arms and legs stretched across the spokes. The executioner would start with your shins, then thighs, then arms, methodically shattering each bone. In some places, like the Low Countries, they'd aim for the gaps between spokes, weaving your broken limbs through the wheel like a grotesque tapestry. If you were lucky or the crowd was merciful, they'd deliver a final blow to your chest or head, ending it. If not, you'd linger, sometimes for hours, as birds circled overhead. Ever wonder what kind of strength it took to face that? The breaking wheel wasn't just about pain, it was about humiliation. This was public justice, meant to deter others. During the German Peasants' War in the 1520s, rebels were wheeled to crush the uprising spirit. Crowds gathered, some shouting insults, others praying for the victim's soul. The church often sanctioned it, claiming it purified the sinner before death. In France, it was called the Wheel of Execution, and records from Paris show it used on highwaymen and traitors as late as the 1700s. The spectacle was key nobles watched from balconies, peasants from the dirt, all united by the grim show. It makes you think what drew people to watch something so brutal. Now, let's talk about the victims. They weren't always hardened criminals. Some were just unlucky caught stealing to feed their families or speaking out against a corrupt lord. Women faced the wheel too, though less often, usually for crimes like infanticide. One story from 15th century Bavaria tells of a man named Hans, a thief who stole from a monastery. His punishment: the wheel, in front of a crowd that included the monks he'd wronged. His screams echoed for hours, the records say, until a priest finally begged for a mercy blow. Stories like that make you wonder, was this justice or just cruelty dressed up as righteousness? The wheel's design made it versatile. In some regions, victims were tied to a cartwheel and beaten. In others, the wheel was custom built, with spikes or grooves to add to the torment. The executioner's skill mattered too. Some were precise, prolonging the suffering. Others were sloppy, causing accidental death too soon. And the crowd played a role. In some towns, they'd demand a quick end. In others, they'd egg the executioner on. It was a twisted kind of community event, like a dark mirror to the festivals we'll talk about later. How do you think you'd react, standing in that crowd? Let's step back. The breaking wheel's power came from its visibility. It wasn't just about punishing one person, it was about controlling everyone else. A single execution could quiet a rebellious town for years. But it also showed the medieval world's contradictions. Knights swore oaths of honor, yet cheered at these displays. The wheel's legacy lingered, even as reformers in the 1700s started calling it barbaric. Today, it's a symbol of a time when justice was raw and unapologetic. What does that say about human nature? As I stand here, The wheel's shadow feels heavier than the dungeon's gloom. Its spokes seem to whisper stories of pain and defiance. Next, we'll explore how these devices weren't just punishment. They were part of a twisted legal system. Ever wonder how torture became justice? Drop a comment and let's keep this story rolling. The crowd's echoes fade as I step back into the dungeon's damp embrace. The breaking wheel's grim spectacle still burning in my mind. I'm standing now in a different kind of chamber, not a public square, but a stone-walled room where lords, bishops, and magistrates turn torture into something they call justice. The air here feels heavy with the weight of decisions made centuries ago, when devices like the rack, pair, and wheel weren't just tools of punishment, but pillars of a legal system that ruled medieval Europe. How did torture become a cornerstone of law? Why did people believe breaking bodies could uphold order? Let's walk through the twisted logic of medieval justice and see how these gruesome devices became its enforcers. Picture yourself in a 13th century courtroom, if you can call it that. It's not like today's polished halls with judges and juries. You're in a drafty castle hall, facing a panel of stern-faced nobles or priests. You're accused of heresy, theft, or maybe witchcraft, and there's no lawyer to defend you. Medieval justice wasn't about evidence the way we think of it. It was about truth, and truth, they believed, could be forced out. Torture devices were their tools, used to extract confessions that were seen as divine proof of guilt. The racks stretch, the wheels crush. They weren't random cruelty, they were part of a system. Ever wonder what it felt like to face justice with no way out? Let's dive into how this worked. In medieval Europe, law blended Roman traditions, church doctrine, and local customs. By the 1200s, the church's influence was massive, especially during the Inquisition, when rooting out heresy became an obsession. The Pope himself, Innocent III, endorsed ordeals to find truth in hot irons or dunking in water. But as those fell out of favor, torture devices took their place. The logic pain purified the soul, and a confession under duress was as good as God's judgment. Courts would order judicial torture to confirm guilt, especially for crimes like treason or blasphemy. The rack, for instance, was a favorite in England's Tower of London for high-profile prisoners. It was systematic, not chaotic. Now, imagine you're the accused. You're dragged to a dungeon, maybe in Toledo or Paris, where a scribe records every word. The torturer starts with light methods, tight ropes, or a few turns on the rack. If you don't confess, they escalate. The pair of anguish might come out for moral crimes, or you'd face the wheel for public punishment. The goal was a confession, because without one, they couldn't always execute you legally. But here's the catch: confess, and you're likely dead anyway. Resist, and the pain worsens. Some trials, like those of the Cathars in southern France, saw dozens racked or worse to crush their rebellion. Can you feel the hopelessness of that trap? But it wasn't just about confessions, it was about control. Medieval society was fragile. Plagues, wars, and revolts kept everyone on edge. Torture devices were a way to stamp out threats, real or imagined, during the Black Death, when fear ran wild. Scapegoats like Jews or witches faced torture to appease panicked crowds. Public punishments, like the breaking wheel, doubled as warnings: obey, or this is your fate. Even knights, bound by chivalry, weren't spared if they betrayed their lord. In 1314, the Knights Templar faced torture across France, racked and burned to seize their wealth. Power, not justice, often pulled the strings. Let's talk about the psychological side. Torture wasn't just physical, it broke minds. The church argued it saved souls: confess, repent, and maybe you'd avoid hell. Victims faced priests alongside torturers, urging them to cleanse themselves. Some believed it, confessing to crimes they didn't commit just to end the pain. Others, like the Templar leader Jacques de Molay, held out, denying charges despite the wreck's torment. That mental chess game, hope versus despair, was what made devices so effective. Ever think about what you do under that kind of pressure? The system had rules, believe it or not. In some places, like Germany, torture needed the judge's approval, and there were limits: 3 sessions. No permanent maiming unless guilt was certain. But those rules were flimsy. Corrupt officials or zealous inquisitors could bend them, especially during witch hunts or rebellions. Records from a 15th century Spain show victims tortured for days, their confessions scribbled down as truth. The devices were tools of fear, not fairness, and everyone knew it. Yet, for centuries, people accepted it as justice. Why? Maybe because fear of chaos was stronger than compassion. As I stand in this imagined courtroom, the ghosts of those trials linger. Torture devices weren't just machines. They were the backbone of a world where order trumped mercy. Next, we'll sit in the witch's chair, a spike nightmare that fueled the witch hunts. Ever wonder how fear turned neighbors into accusers? Drop a comment and let's keep this dark tale moving. The dungeon's walls seem to close in as I approach a heavy wooden chair, its surface bristling with iron spikes that glint like teeth in the torchlight. This is the witch's chair, a torture device that became a chilling symbol of the witch hunts that swept medieval Europe. Unlike the public spectacle of the breaking wheel, this was an intimate terror, designed to break the accused in the shadows of a cell or courtroom. Imagine sitting on those spikes, every movement a fresh stab of pain, while interrogators demand confessions of witchcraft. The witch's chair wasn't just about punishment. It was about fear, superstition, and a society turning on itself. Let's step into the heart of the witch hunts and uncover the grim role this device played. Picture yourself in a small German town around the late 15th century, where whispers of witchcraft spread like wildfire. You're a healer, a midwife, or maybe just a woman who's too outspoken. A neighbor points a finger, claiming you cursed their crops or sickened their child. Before you know it, you're dragged to a damp chamber, and there it is, the witch's chair, waiting. The spikes aren't long enough to kill outright, but they pierce your skin with every shift, every breath. Interrogators lean in, asking if you've danced with the devil. Deny it. And they press you harder into the chair. Confess. And you're likely burned. Can you feel the panic of that moment? Let's break down how the witch's chair worked. It was a wooden or metal seat, sometimes a full-body restraint, studded with sharp spikes, hundreds of them, covering the back, arms, and seat. You'd be strapped in, often naked, to maximize the pain. The spikes were designed to torment, not mutilate. They'd pierce shallowly, causing constant agony without immediate death. In some cases, the chair was heated, adding burns to the mix. The goal was simple: force a confession. During the height of the witch hunts, from the 1400s to the 1600s, this device was a favorite in places like Bamberg or Würzburg, where thousands were accused. The chair's terror lay in its slow, relentless cruelty. Now, imagine the scene. You're in a crowded courtroom, the air thick with fear and incense. A priest recites prayers while the torturer adjusts the straps. The crowd outside chants for justice. But it's not about truth, it's about purging evil. The witch hunts weren't just trials, they were a frenzy. The Malleus Maleficarum, a 1486 manual for witch hunters urged interrogators to use devices like the chair to root out Satan's allies. Women, mostly, faced it. 80% of victims were female, often widows or outcasts. One record from 1590 Scotland tells of Agnes Sampson, a healer, tortured in a spiked chair for days until she confessed to witchcraft, her real crime, knowing too much about herbs. The chair's power wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The spikes forced you to stay still, but pain made that impossible. Every twitch was a choice between enduring or confessing to save yourself, even if it meant death later. The church justified it, claiming witches were so corrupted that only pain could reveal their true nature, and the community they bowled in, driven by fear of the unknown, plagues, famines, and wars, made people desperate for scapegoats, and the witch's chair turned neighbors into accusers. Ever wonder how fear can twist a town against itself like that? Let's talk about why the chair was so effective. It was portable, easy to set up in any dungeon or hole. Unlike the rack, it didn't require strength, just patience. Interrogators could leave you there for hours, letting the spikes do the work. And it was versatile, used not just for witches, but for heretics or rebels too. In some trials, victims were questioned for days, their bodies raw from the spikes. The records are grim in Trier, Germany, during the 1580s. Hundreds were tortured this way, their confessions fueling more accusations. It was a vicious cycle, and the chair was at its heart. But here's the haunting part. The witch's chair didn't just punish, it dehumanized. Victims were stripped of dignity, their pain displayed to prove their guilt, yet some resisted. Stories tell of the women like Walpurga Hausmanin, a midwife in 1587 Germany, who endured the chair and refused to confess until her body gave out. Her defiance, though rare, showed the human spirit's strength even in the darkest moments. Makes you think, what would it take to break you? Or would you hold on? As I stand before this spiked nightmare, I can't shake the thought of those who sat here, their courage or despair etched into history. The witch's chair was a tool of a world gripped by fear, where justice became a hunt. Next, we'll face the Judas cradle, a device that took torture to new depths. Ever heard of it? It's as brutal as it sounds. Drop a comment, could you survive the witch's chair? Let's keep this journey going. The dungeon's flickering torches cast jagged shadows as I approach a device that makes my stomach churn, a tall, pyramid-shaped wooden frame with a pointed tip, suspended by ropes over a single stool. This is the Judas cradle, a torture tool so cruel it feels like it was born from a nightmare. Unlike the witch's chair, which tormented through relentless pressure, the Judas cradle was about precision, forcing victims into a slow, excruciating descent onto its sharp peak. It was a favorite for prolonged interrogations, designed to break even the strongest will through pain and humiliation. I can almost feel the dread of those who faced it, their bodies trembling as they were lowered. Let's uncover the grim truth of the Judas cradle and why it became a symbol of medieval torture's darkest depths. Picture yourself in a 16th century Spanish fortress, the heart of the Inquisition's grip on Europe. You're accused of heresy or plotting against the crown, and the interrogators want answers fast. They lead you to this device, its pointed tip gleaming under candlelight. You're stripped, bound, and hoisted by ropes, your feet dangling just above the pyramid's apex. Then, slowly, they lower you. The cradle's point presses into your body, often targeting the most sensitive areas, causing unbearable pain without spilling much blood. The torturers could keep you there for hours, raising and lowering you to prolong the agony. Can you imagine the terror of that first moment, knowing there's no escape? Let's dive into how it worked. The Judas cradle was deceptively simple, a wooden or metal pyramid, about a foot high, mounted on a sturdy base. Victims were suspended above it, their weight controlled by ropes or chains. The torturer could adjust the pressure, letting the point dig deeper or giving brief relief to drag out the ordeal. Unlike the rack, which stretched, or the witch's chair, which pierced, the cradle's pain was focused, targeting areas meant to maximize suffering and shame. It was often used on those accused of moral crimes, heretics, blasphemers, or alleged witches, because its invasive nature felt like a fitting punishment for sins of the flesh. The goal, a confession, always a confession, even if it was false. Now, imagine the scene. You're in a stone chamber, the air thick with the smell of sweat and fear. A priest stands nearby, urging you to admit your crimes to save your soul. The ropes creak as you're lowered, the cradle's point biting into you. Every muscle screams to resist, but gravity wins. The pain is relentless, and the humiliation being exposed, helpless cuts just as deep. Historical records from the Spanish Inquisition, like those from Toledo in the 1500s, describe victims enduring the cradle for hours, some passing out only to be revived and lowered again. One man, accused of Protestant sympathies in 1560 Seville, confessed after a single session, naming others to stop the pain. His words doomed dozens. The Judas cradle's cruelty wasn't just physical, it was psychological warfare. The slow descent gave you time to think, to dread, to bargain with yourself. Would you confess to crimes you didn't commit? Betray friends to save your body? The device played on that desperation, and it was personal torturers had to watch closely, adjusting the ropes with care. That intimacy made it different from public spectacles, like the breaking wheel. In some cases, the cradle was used in secret, its victims' screams muffled by thick walls. The church saw it as a tool to purge evil, but to the accused, it was a betrayal of humanity, hence the name Judas. Let's talk about why this device was so feared. It was portable, requiring little setup, and its pain was adjustable. Torturers could dial up the intensity without risking quick death. This made it ideal for long interrogations, especially during the witch hunts or religious purges. In regions like Bavaria or Aragon, it targeted those who threatened the social order, rebels, nonconformists, or women accused of witchcraft. A 1590s trial in Munich mentions a woman named Ursula, a suspected witch, who endured the cradle until she admitted to cursing livestock. Her real crime, being a widow with no one to defend her. Stories like hers show how the cradle preyed on the vulnerable. But here's what haunts me. The Judas cradle didn't just break bodies, it broke trust. Victims often named others under torture, fueling a cycle of accusations that tore communities apart. During the Trier witch trials in the 1580s, the cradle's use led to hundreds of confessions, each one sparking new arrests. It was a machine of fear, turning neighbor against neighbor, yet some resisted. A rare few, like a French heretic named Jean in 1530s records, refused to speak, enduring the cradle's torment until death. Their defiance, though costly, was a flicker of hope in a dark time. Ever wonder what it takes to stay silent under that kind of pain? As I stand before the Judas cradle, its pointed tip feels like a challenge, daring anyone to face it and come out whole. This wasn't just a device, it was a weapon of despair, stripping away dignity and hope. Next, We'll meet those who survived these horrors and defied their torturers. Can you imagine outlasting the cradle's pain? Drop a comment and let's keep this grim tale moving. The Judas cradle's sinister silhouette fades as I turn away, my footsteps echoing in the dungeon's gloom. But now I'm drawn to the stories of those who faced these horrors and somehow held on. The rack, the witch's chair, the cradle they were designed to break, to force confessions through unbearable pain. Yet some souls refused to bend. These survivors, whether through faith, defiance, or sheer grit, stared down medieval torture and left behind tales that still echo through history. Their courage in the face of devices meant to crush body and spirit is a testament to the human will. Let's walk through the lives of these remarkable people and uncover what gave them the strength to endure the unendurable. Picture yourself in a 14th century cell, the air thick with the stench of damp stone and fear. You're bound, facing the wreck's ropes or the cradle's point, and the torturer demands you confess to heresy or treason. Most would crack pain is a brutal persuader, but some didn't. These weren't just knights or nobles, they were ordinary people too, caught in a world where a wrong word could mean agony. Their stories aren't just about survival, they're about defiance, about refusing to let their tormentors win. Can you imagine finding that kind of strength when every nerve screams to give in? Let's start with one of the most famous Joan of Arc, the teenage warrior son of 15th century France. Captured in 1430, she faced the church's wrath for leading armies and claiming divine visions. They didn't use the rack or cradle on her. Her trial was more about words, but the threat of torture loomed. Records from Rouen describe interrogators showing her the dungeon's devices, including spiked chairs, to scare her into recanting. Joan, barely 19, stood firm, even as they burned her at the stake. Her defiance wasn't just physical, it was a refusal to betray her beliefs. Ever wonder what it takes to face death rather than break? Now, let's meet someone less known, Margaret Clitheroe, a Catholic in 16th century England, when practicing her faith was treason. In 1586, she was arrested for hiding priests. Instead of the rack, they used a crushing method of weights piled on her body to force a plea. Margaret refused to speak. Knowing a trial could endanger others, she endured until death, her silence a shield for her allies. Her story, buried in York's records, shows how torture didn't always win. The devices were fearsome, but faith or loyalty could be stronger. What would you protect with your last breath? Then there's the Knights Templar, the warrior monks crushed by King Philip IV of France in 1307, accused of heresy to seize their wealth. Hundreds faced the rack and other devices. Jacques de Molay, their leader, was tortured, repeatedly racked and burned at the feet, yet denied most charges for years. Even when he confessed under pain, he later recanted, shouting his innocence as he burned in 1314. The Templars' ordeal, documented in French chronicles, wasn't just about survival, it was a stand against greed and betrayal. Their defiance fueled legends of Templar secrets that still captivate us. Ever think about what you'd hold on to under that pressure? Let's talk about the common folk, too. During the German witch hunts of the 1580s, a woman named Maria Holl, a tavern keeper in Nördlingen, faced the witch's chair and other tortures, accused of witchcraft. She endured spiked restraints and starvation, yet refused to confess, insisting on her innocence. Her trial records show she outlasted months of torment, and miraculously, her stubbornness swayed the court, she was freed. Maria's story is rare. Most witches died, but her defiance proved torture could fail. Imagine the courage to face those spikes and still say, I'm innocent. These survivors shared something belief, whether in God, justice, or themselves. But it wasn't easy. Torture devices like the pear or cradle were designed to exploit human weakness. And even the strongest faltered. Some, like Guy Fawkes in 1605 England, resisted the rack for days before breaking, naming co-conspirators in the gunpowder plot. His initial silence, though, bought time for others to escape. Even in defeat, there was defiance. The psychological toll was immense. Survivors often carried scars, physical and mental, for life. Ever wonder how you'd rebuild after something like that? What's striking is how these stories cut through the medieval world's darkness. Torture was about control, but defiance showed that power wasn't absolute. In the Albigensian Crusade, Cathar heretics faced the rack and wheel, yet many died singing hymns, their faith unshaken. Their resistance, noted in 13th century chronicles, rattled the church. These acts, big and small, planted seeds of doubt about torture's justice. By the 1700s, reformers pointed to such courage to argue for change. Makes you think, could one person's stand ripple through history? As I stand in this imagined dungeon, the echoes of the survivors feel louder than the device's creaks. They faced the worst of humanity and found something unbreakable within. Next, we'll explore how this brutal past shapes our world today. Can you imagine defying the rack or cradle? What would keep you fighting? Drop a comment and let's keep this story alive. The dungeon's shadows seem to soften as I step back. The ghosts of survivors like Joan and Maria lingering in the air, their defiance a faint light against the horrors of the rack, the cradle, and the witch's chair. But now, I'm thinking about what all this means not just for the medieval world, but for us, standing in 2025 still drawn to these dark stories. Why do we keep circling back to torture's legacy? How did devices like the pear of anguish or the breaking wheel shape the way we think about justice, power, and humanity today? Let's walk out of this dungeon and into the present, tracing the long shadow of medieval torture and why it still grips our imagination. Picture yourself in a modern courtroom, all sleek wood and glowing screens, a far cry from the stone-walled chambers of the 1400s. We like to think we've left the brutality of the Middle Ages behind. No more racks, no more spiked chairs. But have we? The medieval world's obsession with control through pain didn't vanish. It just changed shape. Today, we debate solitary confinement, enhanced interrogations, or the ethics of capital punishment. The tools are different, but the questions are the same. How far is too far to keep order? The Judas cradle's cruelty feels alien, yet it forces us to ask, what are we capable of when fear takes over? Let's look at how we got here. The medieval reliance on torture, justified by the church and kings, started cracking in the 1700s. Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire read stories of the Templars' torment or witch hunt victims and called it barbaric. Their push for reason over superstition led to reforms. Torture was banned in places like Prussia by 1754, England by the 1800s. But the memory of devices like the breaking wheel lingered, shaping laws that prized evidence over confessions. Today's legal systems, with their emphasis on rights, owe a debt to those who suffered and the reformers who listened. Ever wonder how many lives it took to change those rules? Now, let's talk about culture. Why are we, in 2025, still obsessed with medieval torture movies, games, and shows like Game of Thrones or Assassin's Creed lean into the drama of knights and dungeons? But they don't shy away from the dark stuff torture scenes draw us in. The Iron Maiden, myth or not, pops up in museums and Halloween displays because it's a perfect mix of horror and history, our fascination isn't just morbid, it's a way to grapple with human nature. We look at the pair of anguish and think, that's not us. But then we see modern debates about ticking bomb scenarios and wonder, are we as far removed as we think? The psychological impact of torture's legacy is huge. Medieval devices were about breaking minds as much as bodies, and we see echoes in today's studies on trauma. Survivors like Maria Hall carried scars that didn't fade, and modern psychology shows how pain and fear rewire the brain. Yet, those stories of defiance, Joan's courage, the Templars' silence also teach us resilience. They remind us that even in the worst moments, people can hold on to something bigger. That's why we tell these stories, why we dig into the past. It's not just about the devices, it's about what they've revealed then and now. Let's zoom out. The medieval world, with its knights and castles, feels romantic, but its torture devices show a truth we can't ignore. Power unchecked becomes cruelty. That lesson hits hard today, when we wrestle with surveillance, censorship, or how to punish the guilty without losing our humanity. The racks stretch, the cradles point, they're gone. But they left a warning fear can twist justice into something monstrous. We study them to remember, to stay vigilant. Ever think about what you'd fight for if power turned against you? As I stand here, the dungeon's way feels like a challenge to learn from the past, not repeat it. These devices, from the wheel to the chair, were tools of their time, but their story is ours too. They ask us to look at our own world, our own choices. What's the line between justice and vengeance? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe for more dives into history's shadows. Next time, we'll explore another medieval mystery, maybe the Templars' lost secrets. What do you want to uncover? The story of medieval torture devices, from the rack's relentless pull to the Judas cradle's piercing cruelty, reveals a world where fear ruled and justice was a blade. These tools weren't just about punishment, they were about power, control, and a society desperate to hold itself together. Yet, in the screams of the dungeon, we hear defiance, Joan of Arc's unshaken faith, Maria Hall's stubborn silence. Their courage shaped a legacy that pushed humanity toward fair laws, even if the journey's not done. Today, we are drawn to these stories not just for their horror, but for what they teach us about resilience and the cost of unchecked power. In 2025, as we face our own battles over justice and freedom, the Middle Ages whisper a warning: stay human, or risk becoming the torturer. What's the next dark corner of history you want to explore? Comment below, like, and subscribe to keep the journey going.